Hey, Ron, good to have you.
Thank you. This is long overdue. Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to hang out at Geeks on the Beach in the Philippines. And we're very much, we're both podcasters. We're both like founder mentality. Why haven't we done this yet? And so I'm glad we finally made it happen. Ron, could you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm going to do the short form version, not the long form podcast version. So I'm the founder and CEO of Podcast Network Asia, and also just the recent product that we launched called Asia-E509 FM. But also, I am a podcaster, just like what you said. I am the host of the Hustle Share podcast, basically the number one startup podcast in the Philippines. So that's my beat. I talk about the Philippine startup ecosystem.
Yeah, fantastic. And what I want to hear, of course, is like going back all the way in time. We're going to hear about what you were like in the early days. I think you've done about 4 startups along the way. Mm-hmm. And obviously, you're an expert on course on the podcast space as well. So lots to learn. I want to go back to the beginning. What were you like as a university student? Were you like a good student? Or did you know you're going to be a founder one day?
Nope.
But what was it like?
I grew up as a lower middle class Filipino.
Yeah.
I was raised by a single mom. I'm an only child. And there's this thing, BCG just released a study, BCG Philippines released that there's a Filipino dream. And the Filipino dream that we had, me and my mom, was we wanted to buy we just wanted to buy our own house because we've rented all our lives. That was it. That was the bare minimum we wanted to be able to get. Growing up, I'll start in high school. I wasn't a smart student. Matter of fact, I'm a jock. I used to be a varsity basketball player. So varsity basketball players here in the Philippines don't really study well, so I flunked out a lot of things. Just went through the motions. Ballless life was my life. And then in college, I couldn't play basketball anymore, and then I still had the jock mentality. And I failed one subject that nobody fails. It's algebra. I'm like, oh my god! All of a sudden, now I'm delayed. Or no, I didn't get delayed. I had to play catch up, and that's when I realized, man, I can't. My mom doesn't deserve this. I need to do better. So the first thing that I did, and this is very Filipino. First year college, I was 18, literally just legal to work. I applied in a call center because I felt like I needed to acquire a skill that would allow me to be successful. Obviously, that's not going to be through studies because I'm not. I think I'm street smart, but I'm not a bookworm, man. So that's not my game. So if I'd have a chance, is doubling down on the gift of gab that I have. But I need to speak. So I studied in a call center. I was a telemarketer, and I learned how to speak like this because by default, this is not the typical Filipino accent. And after that, I had an epiphany during the call center that, okay, if I'm ever going to be able to buy my mama house, it's never going to be through employment. I wanted to be an entrepreneur because I saw my colleagues there. I was 18, I'm still in school, actually. I was still studying full time. I slept 3 hours a day for a good 9 months. I saw how a lot of my peers were like 45 years old, 50 years old. They're still technically doing what I'm doing. And is this my future? I don't want to do this. So I want to take on entrepreneurship and be contrarian to take that on. And how I got there, I took up entrepreneurship in the University of Santo Tomas, the oldest university in Asia, 400 years old. It's not known for business school. And during that, I came up with my first startup, which is a nightlife app, because it was my own pain point. I love to party before, but every single time I go out to clubs, say, if you're from Singapore, Zook, you need to be on the guest list. You need to be on Hazel's guest list in order for you to be able to get in. I didn't have those connections, so I said, why not create a website back then to get people in the club? That's how I started out.
Yes, obviously, as a jock, that must have been quite an interesting experience. And then you did your first job is obviously you were at Groupon, and that was your experience as an employee. What was the learnings from that?
Okay, so I did Groupon after probably a year and a half of doing guestlist.ph. And I felt like I was seeing a pattern. Okay, I'm able to garner like 50,000 users. Easy. But when I look at the revenue, there's nothing. Like, what is going on? What is wrong with me? So I said, I felt like, okay, I knew how to speak, but I didn't know how to close. And then Groupon, the group buying craze just started happening here in 2011. So, you know what? Let me try to work first. Let me see what I can do. And then I applied, and they taught me the most foundational skill that I have that I still use till now. So give of gab plus sales. I learned how to be a salesman. I became their top seller in 2 months, stayed there for 11 months because, okay, I think I'm ready. I'm ready to go back in. So That was my longest employment ever, 11 months. Hindsight being 2020, I should have stayed longer. But it's too late. I drank the founder Kool-Aid right away, and then I went back, and man, I struggled again.
Okay, so let me understand that a little bit. So you were building this nightlife experience, and you're doing that on the side while you're working at Groupon.
Yeah.
And then you went back to it. Okay, I think that happens a lot, right? Because a lot of founders are like, you want to build something and it's not really working out, so you gotta pay the bills, right? Reality strikes. But it's quite interesting because you said two statements. You said you went back, which is what you did back then, and the other thing you said was you wish you had stayed longer. Could you explain both sides of that?
No, it's obviously hindsight's always 2020. Having the ability to actually interview founders and the best there is, a lot of them actually stayed for a couple of times for far longer to actually develop new skills. I'm lucky I was able to develop salesmanship, right? But I imagine if I've been able to at least level up, because I quit as an AE, as a salesman. If I learned how to be a manager, if I learned, say, better Excel skills or whatnot, or improve my skill stack at least, I would have done better, and it would have been less painful to do that. Because when I went all in, and I was a solo founder after that, I was broke for 2 years before Kickstart funded me. And they said no to me 4 times before they finally said yes. So very painful. But I guess hindsight being 2020, it was worth it. But I didn't know that there was like a safe way to get it. I was just super gung ho on being an entrepreneur, man, but I paid the price.
So it was interesting because when you say pay the price, there's a couple of things that you mentioned, right? So one obviously is, I guess, the status or the signal. The other one is the learning from it. And I guess thirdly, of course, was when you went back, it wasn't as glamorous as you thought it was.
Right.
So it's like going back to the grind. But what was your thinking back then, right? Like you made a decision to go back. You must have felt it was better than being an AE, account executive. Was it because the party business was growing? Was it because you felt like you had the skills? How was that working out? Yeah.
I didn't like people telling me what to do. So I had authority problems back then. And I felt like I wasn't the best employee. I was trying to always find ways to do things better, quicker, faster, without having to hustle too much, because I wanted to work on my own stuff. And I felt like if I want to do my own stuff, it's also detrimental to the company that I work for if I wanted to work on my own stuff. Luckily, I felt like, all right, I've saved enough because I was getting a lot of commissions. That was gone in like a couple months. So I'm back to being broke. But really looking back at it, I really felt like very early on, I knew that I needed to be an entrepreneur. And if I was going to learn through the way, I'm grateful a lot of people helped me out along the way, because if I couldn't have learned that on myself. So the MBA that I got was technically Guestless.ph Partyphile. I did that for 6 years. Obviously it failed. It failed after 500 startups invested in me, Kylie, Dave, and all that. But man, that's how I learned everything, and it also humbled me. That's the most important thing, because when you fail and you taste that defeat, it's like grief. It never leaves you. And on a lot of days that when shit hits the fan in PNA or whatever, I always draw back, like, I don't ever want to feel that again, because it's traumatizing.
So when we think about that, obviously the idea kind of makes sense to me, right? Which is that people want to party. So why don't you help them party? And then you said that eventually you failed. So could you walk through like that experience? Sure. What you think went well? What was good? What was it that you wish you could have done differently?
Yep. Sure. A couple of things. What went well first? What went well is that I knew the user very well, because I was the user. I knew what people wanted. I knew what people make them tick. I knew what FOMO they wanted. And what you realize when you see this all the time, there's a pattern, and it becomes less of an art, but more of a science. Like how people will react and when people would want to go to party, right? The problem was, I was the problem. I was too raw. I was a solo founder, technically. I didn't have a team. And now, hindsight being 2020, man, I wish I had a team. Because now, doing everything that I'm doing, man, it's just very difficult if you didn't have anything to bounce off of. So number one, I was solo founder. Number two, I was stubborn on making sure that, hey, I didn't want to be called a promoter because I was an app. So what matters is your MRR. Now, before, I didn't want to sell tables because I wanted to just take care of the guest list. Had I sold tables, I would have made shit ton of money because that's how promoters make a lot of money. I don't know if you're familiar, but in a club, the rest are fillers. What makes them money is table service. The ones that would net you probably $5,000 to $10,000 a night per table. The high rollers, it's like a casino, right? You want to get the whales, right? And if you were able to get that, get commission, man, I would have made so much money. And third, doing nightlife for 6 years, it eats you up. It's not something that you can. I'm actually amazed by those people that can stay in nightlife for a long time, because once you stay in it for too long, it's gonna chew you up and spit you out dead, not alive. Because that's where I also learned massive self-restraint. I pride myself on not shitting where I eat. Never. But a lot of people, since you're so close to vices, smoking, sex, drugs, alcohol, whatever, you're so close. You're one bad decision away from fucking your life up. So I felt like it's run its course. But there's also a definitive moment in 2016 of how the game was over. There was a big rave in 2016 called Close Up Forever Summer. Probably at least 40,000 people came. We were there. We sold some tickets. We were seeing the uptick now. Man, we can sell tickets. We had an angel investor go in. We had free tickets. After I gave him the tickets, I went home. I was like, man, I'm tired. This is so exhausting. It's open air. It's so humid. I'm done. The very next morning, I got a call from his wife and his brother-in-law looking for him. And apparently he passed away. He was supposed to lead our next round. He took a bad pill, passed away. 5 people passed away during that night. And nightlife was never the same after that. Duterte won the presidency, and his mantra was all about there's no drugs, there's a war on drugs. Until now, what, almost 5, 6, 9 years later, it's never been the same.
Oh, shit. That's horrible. And like you said, there's definitely an example of one bad decision away, right, from it being horrible. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because you chose to wrap up the business. So what was the process for you to say this is like not the way forward? Because you would later go on to build another company, Chatbot.ph. But what was that process for you to come to that realization?
I didn't want to quit. Someone had told me, so his name is Alex Alabiso, one of the heads of Kickstart back then. And I was literally scratching and clawing. One-man team again, let go of my 20 employees at that point, so we didn't have runway. And he said, Ron, you look like shit. You're smoking. The only vice I had was smoking cigarettes. But you know what? There's nothing wrong with just saying it's over. But why don't you do this? He said, why don't you write everything that you feel in your heart and just put your heart out there. Okay, it's over. Turn the page. I wrote a Medium blog, and I can give you the link on this after. The year was 2016, September, around that time. Of 13 reasons why Partyphile failed. I didn't share it, but the geeks in Startup.ph found it, and it became viral. Because basically I was just pouring my heart out. Like, where did I fuck up? But that eventually became my compass of what not to do moving forward. So hindsight, how did I do it? In the Philippines, I was lucky. I got help from our lawyers as well. Say, hey, why don't you just shorten the lifespan of the company? And also be transparent with your investors that I fucked up. I still remember one email from Minette Navarrete of Kickstart, who was really pivotal, that at the end of the day, what you'll need to do, I'm paraphrasing here, but self-mastery is the key to success. And if this is my rock bottom, I'll make sure that I come better out of this. So all these lessons come in hindsight, and when you're rock bottom again, the only path forward is up. But you have to be a better version of yourself and not make the same mistakes.
And you chose to convert that into building your second company, which is Partyphile. So could you share a little bit about Chatbots.ph and what and why you decided to do that?
Okay. It was literally the last days of Partyphile. Partyphile and guest list is the same. It just basically, I just rebranded it. Last few days of Partyphile, I was in the office and I saw that there was a news that Mark Zuckerberg said that there's going to be chatbots now on Messenger. I said, wow, that's cool. I wish I had this, because the way people really send their names for a guest list was typing it in a long list and sending it to you. It's like, where was this? I did the app route in 2014 and nobody knew what QR codes were back then, right? I was too early for the game in terms of using QR codes. But then this thing comes. I said, you know what? Why don't I just buy the domain Chatbot.ph? And I went to GoDaddy. It's available. All right, bet I'll do that. I bought the domain Chatbot.ph. I created a janky ass landing page, and in a span of 1.5 weeks, dude, I was on top of the search engines. Everybody was looking for chatbots. I didn't know anything about bots, but I knew how to create something from scratch now. So my first MVP was a PowerPoint. And all of a sudden, a month later, my first client was paying me $10,000 to create them a bot. And that just kept rolling and rolling and rolling and rolling. I got a few seed funding from my co-founders who were part-time. And that's it. After 12 months of doing that, and again, a playbook of what not to do, 12 months after, it got acquired. And then through that, I was able to buy my mom a house. This is the house. I live in the house now. There.
Congratulations. And what do you think was the success factors for that?
Okay. First off, timing. It's really timing. AI at the first iteration of the first wave of AI chatbots, man, it was hot, right? But second, I was very focused on revenue. I remember in the chatbot business, man, I had what, probably 200, 300, $400,000 in close. But the problem back then was nobody pays on time. B2B never pays on time. So I have a lot of accounts receivable, but I was starting to get low on cash. But that's what the acquirer saw. Wow, this is acquiring companies called Sterling Paper Group. Sterling Paper Group owns one of the bigger call centers here in Manila, servicing local companies. And they said, if there's going to be something that's going to put us out of business in the BPO business, it's AI. So why not acquire them early now and then build internally? But second is I knew how to build a team. I knew how to build a team. I knew the fundamentals of how startups should be, what my focus should be, and how to iterate from 0 to 1 or 0 to 10 very quickly.
Yep. And as you go from point A to point B, you made the decision to like sell. So why sell versus push on?
Okay, I was raising funding actually. And what I got instead of a fundraising offer was an acquisition offer. And Jeremy, again, the Filipino dream. Okay, I was so used to not having salary. I literally came from an L, a loss. And here is an offer what can literally change my life overnight, and that's the Filipino dream. And I still get to run the company after. And I knew it's going to be a long game because it's chatbots. It's very early on in the AI game. I need backup. You know what? This is an easy win. It's not a home run. Let's just say it's a walk, but I get to still get to walk the thing. I'll take the win, because through that, then I can use that as a baseline now to keep building moving forward. So that's why I took it.
Yeah. And you continue working after the acquisition. So what was the experience like? Because it was a good chunk of time.
Okay. I did not know what I was signing up for. But okay, in hindsight, again, this is where I learned how to be a corporate exec. Because now you're a startup in a conglomerate, right? I have a fancy ass office overlooking Manila and nice, but every single thing is part of a bureaucracy now. Even tissue paper, man. I have to get approval to buy tissue paper. But now, so great, I have backup, I have resources, but what I traded it up for was speed. I was way slower. So at the start, again, there was a honeymoon period. This is okay, we'll figure it out, blah, 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 blah. But eventually, it just dragged me down and like, man, we want to be able to iterate. But even little things I had to get approval, we couldn't get to startup speed anymore. And that hampered us down. right? Where we were probably at least 2 to 3 steps ahead of the competition back then. Now we're neck to neck because of this. So that's a telltale sign. But again, hindsight being 2020, I had salary, my team is taken care of, everything. But until the pandemic came, that's when when it really became terrible, because during the pandemic, the mother company also was low in cash. But also, while going through that stuff, I started feeling the itch again, Jeremy, because I couldn't chase what I wanted to chase. Man, what am I doing? My best years, I was 30 years old, my best years had ahead of me, and I'm asking for approval for tissue paper. It doesn't make sense. Where do I channel this urge to create? That's how Hustle Share was born. The reason why I wanted to, and I didn't want to create a podcast first in 2019. There was a dream that I didn't really shoot my shot on before, was I wanted to be a radio DJ growing up in college. I never shot my shot. So I applied, or I studied voice acting. Half of the time they just asked me to dub, but that's how I learned how to sound better on the mic and whatnot. I applied into these radio stations. Nobody gave me a shot. You know what? Screw it. There's this thing called a podcast. My fiance, who's now my wife, said, "Why don't you just create your own podcast?" Right? And I loved this podcast before called Entree Leadership. That was my peg, by the Ramsey Studios from Tennessee, Dave Ramsey. And that was my peg. I love that show. I said, I want to create my own Entree Leadership of the Philippines. So that's how Hustle Share was born.
And before we talk about that piece, obviously you got to buy that house. What was that experience like?
Best day of my life. It was the best day of my life. As I said, okay, as a Filipino, again, not everybody gets to do this. And now I get to go from lower middle class to probably upper middle class, or probably even the affluent class. I not just buy a house, but actually provide. Right? My mom was literally retiring. The ball is on me now. I need to be able to do that. But one thing also, Jeremy, before I did everything here, even before Partyphile, I had a mentor who taught me the real basics, the ABCs of startups. His name is Joji Azurin, who recently just passed on. Before he helped me, he said that I don't owe him anything. But he said that if I ever become successful, I shouldn't pay him back. I should pay it forward. Verbatim, that's what he said. So I said, okay, now I have the house. It feels great, but I don't want this to be about me. I have a bargain. So if Joji helped me out, I need to pay it forward. So I said, what's the best way to do that? That feeling of ecstatic, and man, that's what I'm still chasing, honestly, in Podcast Network Asia. I want one more. It's like winning a championship. That's what it feels like in a basketball term or a team sport term. It's like winning a championship. When you get it, when you get that high, you want one more. And I want one more. But this time I want to pay it forward too. And that's that technically is Hustle Share. I'm trying to pay it forward to the Philippine startup ecosystem, who's been super kind to me. And let's just call it what it is. The Philippines isn't the hotbed for great startups here. We're lagging behind everybody. But the reason why we also lag behind is because a lot of founders make the same mistakes all the time. So if we document these same mistakes and the wins, then hopefully we end up with better founders. So that's what Hustle Share was born.
And again, you were working at this company and then you were doing Hustle Share at the same time. Yeah. So it was like a dual track for some chunk of time. Yep. What was that experience like?
No, it's a side hustle. It doesn't eat up my time. And you probably know this too. Podcasting isn't too much of a grind. You interview people for an hour or two for a good 3-week span and you're set. But honestly, it's therapeutic for me. And also felt like it's a startup again. Like, wow, I'm chasing something. I see the podcast chart and all that. And that's also how I started looking into the podcast ecosystem in 2019. There's only 20% of the top 200 podcasts in the Philippines were Filipino made. I'm like, why? Where's everybody? How come there's not enough shows? And true enough, six months after Hustle Share, that's how Podcast Network Asia was born.
And we have talked, and you were both podcasters. What was your experience learning? Because obviously you started earlier. You also built out a network as well. Can I share some of those learnings along the way?
Sure. So number one, the learnings is that on the technical side of podcasting, the easiest thing you can do is actually the interview. The hard work that it entails after. So I remember the first 6 months, actually, this is why I created PNA, is that the first 6 months I did everything. One-man show again, man. 1 hour of recording is always equals to 4 hours of post production. And that usually eats up my whole Sunday, which is my rest day. I needed that to recharge. And now I waste half of my day just trying to edit. Man, this got to be better, because I knew that I was going to hit a wall. And apparently that there's a term for that. It's called pod fading. So I don't want to, I want to be able to hit that wall and do this for a long time over. Second is that I had a certain metric. It's like, okay, I want this to be monetized, because if I know that there's no money here, the salesman in my head will be like, stop doing that. It's not worth your time. Luckily, 10 episodes in, I got my first sponsor. It has been sponsored ever since. So I was like, yay. I'll trick my brain that, hey, you owe this sponsor X and Y. So you need to deliver what you told them what you're going to do. But the non-technical stuff is that there's patterns over startup stories, and it never gets old. There's pattern of solving problems, struggle, how they triumph. And I'm pretty sure you've seen multiple tropes of this. But also, it's enjoying the journey, because there's a high probability everybody's going to fail, or a lot of us is going to fail. But what it gives you and what it unlocks inside you is actually the most beautiful thing about startups. I was actually, it's funny, I'm going to go on tangent a little bit here, Jeremy. I was in Kickstart the other day. I was just, every once in a while, I'd say hi whenever there's an event. A random kid approaches me and was like, hey, are you the guy from Partyphile? And majority of the time, he'd be like, hey, you're the guy from HustleShare. I love what you're doing. Thank you. Appreciate it. But this guy came out of nowhere, 18-year-old kid, says, hey, I know, are you the guy from Partyphile? I'm like, yes. Are you a user? You look too young. No, I heard about this guy who did this X amount of years ago, who's never been able to do it before, do it again after Partyphile shut down. And nobody's filling that void. I'm trying to fill that void. I want to do what you did. I'm like, sure. I have a playbook of what not to do. But what I'm saying here is that, okay, we might have failed, but the impact it created in the industry, and after that, nobody's ever been able to do it again, says a lot. You might have not won, but in startup terms, but the impact of solving a problem is indelible. And hustle share in podcasts, bro. This will outlive us. The biggest learning, man, that I've learned, and this is why I will do this for until the day that I can speak, is Joji, my mentor, my co-founder, when he passed away. I've had 3 or 4 very important people in my life now that have been on the show that are no longer with us, that have passed on. I'm so lucky that I've gotten to interview them, because when their family misses them, and we want to just relive their greatness and the way they got here, this will outlive us. This is the legacy play that I'm doing. So whether I'm doing a startup or not, hustle share will always be my constant.
Yeah. And that's quite incredible, which is that definitely there's a legacy component of doing a podcast. And I totally get why you started it. Why did you continue doing a podcast? Is it because it's fun? Because it's purposeful? Like, how do you feel about continuing the podcast? Because it's been quite a number of years for you and the Hustle Share.
This is gonna sound corny, but this is my ikigai. This is so natural to me. I'm a talker by default. I love having long ass conversations anyway. The only difference is that now I do it. And second, I see the void. I see the role that it plays in this Philippine startup ecosystem. Like what I said, there's a lot of, we're lagging. And if nobody's documenting the stories here, we're bound to fail, because it's history is bound to repeat itself. And even with hustle share, people still make the same mistakes, right? More if it didn't exist. But also, I see the role that it plays. So, Jeremy, people always tell me like, "Hey, Ron, thank you. What did I do? Hey, I found my." Several people have already done this. Actually, no, more than several people. One, they always say, "Hey, I found my client through Hustle Share." Oh, I found an investor through Hustle Share. Oh, I found a partner through Hustle Share. The reason that they're able to actually tear down walls of things that they would have not been able to shoot their shot is because they found out about somebody's story and their origin story and said, hey, you know what? I'll reach out. I love his story. And if it yields into business, into opportunities, it's just like literally opening a door for everyone without you actually physically opening it. So that's what it plays. So that's why I keep doing it. And again, it's fun too. It's therapeutic in nature, especially when you're going through shit.
And what's interesting is that you've also built it as a podcast and you also made it into a network as well. Yeah. So those are two very different business models, correct, two very different approaches. So what made you say, hey, this is my voice versus broadening it out to a set of voices?
No, because at the end of the day, the problem statements are the same. So what are the problem statements of a podcast? Number one, it's hard to edit. Nobody knows how to edit, right? And that's why people pod fade. They don't want to keep editing their show. Number two, hard to monetize. Number three, hard to grow. Every single podcast that are out there have the same problem. I learned how to solve all of those very quickly in my show. I was like, hey, why don't I solve that for everybody else? And literally replicate how startup with community builders and incubators do that, but for the podcast ecosystem. And then also timing wise, in 2019, there was a buying spree of podcast companies. Gimlet was being bought. All of these guys, Parcast was being bought. Hey, okay, there might be something here. And then we joined the Final Pitch, which is the local startup equivalent of the Philippines. You know what? Let's just try. I have this idea. We won. We got our funding. My co-founder was my former lawyer in Kickstart. I said, you know what? Let's do it. But we were literally just doing this on the side. Another side hustle. He was still being a lawyer. I was still running Chatbot.ph.
And what's interesting is also you decided to set up Siri as well, which is your latest adventure in the audio space. Could you share about that?
Okay, before I talk about Seria FM, I'll talk about how we got here first. So the initial model of Podcast Network Asia is simple. First off is we invest in podcasts that we believe are going to be high potential, right? And then when we do that, we help them monetize through advertising or affiliate marketing, and we get a rev share. Typically, it's 30%. But through the first 3 or 4 years, it was doing well, especially during the start of the pandemic. But I was seeing a pattern, Jeremy. First off, the first pattern, and this is not good. Number one, 80% of budgets of brands when they advertise, or big brands and big money brands, is pre-allocated in Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Google. You cannot touch that. Number two, if a 20% experimental budget existed, that 20%, you're not the only game in town who wants that. So you're already technically begging for peanuts, and you're not the only one in town to get that done. Number three, even if you close something, I don't care how good you are, the deployment of those funds will only come every Q3 and Q4. And when they deploy, brands don't pay on time. So imagine podcaster says spiel number one is like, hey, I already delivered. Where's my money? So I was like, shit, okay, I'm gonna have to top up and send them something. And my cash flow is only gonna come in 90 days if that's early. Sometimes it takes 120 days. And then I only get 30%. We did everything and I only get 30%. Shit, this is not gonna work well. However, there's a caveat. We were very good partners with Spotify. Matter of fact, our best shows, around 12 of them, became Spotify exclusive. They're paying us around $20,000 every year per show. So it's like, all right, there's cash flow. And then Spotify asked us to create 50 shows, 30 here in the Philippines, 20 in Indonesia, to become a Spotify exclusive. So we look for the KOL, the creator, we edit and everything. They paid us around $1,200 US per show. So on months that there isn't cash flow from ads, that's what kept us afloat. And that's also the very first iteration of Pod Machine, because eventually, Jeremy, went from one show to 320 shows in a span of 3 years. Running a show is already crazy. Imagine 320 shows. And we were all doing it on Messenger, Viber, WhatsApp. You know what? We got to centralize this because this is too much. So when we did that, Pod Machine became a thing. Pod Machine basically is our centralized podcast as a service platform. And yeah, that's how we did it. And then 2023, the worst thing happened. Spotify had a directional change across the board coming from the top that they're not going to do what they did with the Joe Rogans of the world and make them Spotify exclusive. They rescinded all the contracts, 50 shows and Spotify exclusives. 70% of my MRR came from that on Pod Machine. It's gone overnight. So I had to cut half of my team, let go of our studio, and all of the shows that we were selling ads for, we had to pass it along. My co-founder had a friend who wanted to be in the podcast network business. Like, all right, here are my babies, the best of the best, it's yours. And the only way we can actually get back was through Pod Machine. We focused on that because that's where cash flow would come. We had 1 or 2 months runway. We asked for a extension round from our investors, but me and Joseph, my co-founder, said, "All right, we will not take salary until we get to cash flow positive." That was March last year. We got to cash flow positive November last year. But the worst card that was dealt to me, to us, happened in June. All of a sudden, Joseph passed away. It's so like, how, how do you even fucking get off of this? It's so hard. It we're our longest runway, Jeremy, during that stretch was 1 month. So it's literally scratching and clawing for survival. And you're probably gonna ask me this, but I'll already answer this now. This is the bravest shit I've done because I could have easily quit when Joseph passed away, and it would have been fair because it was the end. It was the end of the line. But man, when I saw my team hustling every single day and my Slack was blowing up, and all my investors never threw me under the bus, that was the reason why I kept trudging along. If it wasn't for me, it's because so many people believed. And also, on a personal standpoint, remember Partyphile? I don't ever want to feel that again. So you're gonna have to kill me to let me stop. Yeah, that's how we got here. And then last year, towards the end of last year, a VC that we were pitching sent me a deck of Pocket FM. I was like, what is Pocket FM? What is this? So two things stood out. So they were growing exponentially. They were doing long form, short form audio series. They call it audio series in their own app. And they were killing it. And two things stood out. Their third biggest market after the United States and India is the Philippines, but they're only serving English only content. I was supposed to approach them to, hey, can I do post production for you? But I realized, hey, you know what? I can do this too. And that's how Serie FM was born. If there is a market, and I know there is because I've seen it in podcasts, the only reason why I couldn't do B2C before is because we're in bed with Spotify. I don't bite the hand that feeds me. But Spotify is dormant now, and I don't think they'll ever come back to what they were doing. So it's fair game. I can do B2C now. But I didn't want to create an app because obviously we don't have the resources to do that. The way we did it was we found a way to put the same paywall that Pocket FM does, but within Spotify. So uploading as a podcast. So the first 7 episodes are free, 10 to 15 minutes a pop. And then you hit a paywall, you go to Serie FM. And then boom, we showed it to Iterative. Ken and Ryan, I pitched them 2 times, and this time they like what we're doing, and that's how we were able to bounce back. And now, man, it's been growing crazy month on month, 5 months straight, at least 100% month on month growth, and it looks like it's not stopping.
Amazing. And when you're making that decision to go from this new approach, I think you mentioned like platform risk, right? Which is saying, I don't want to be a Spotify. Well, both of them are platform risk. Like Spotify here, you want to build your own. Can you share a little bit more about how you're thinking about that?
Oh, so obviously we had to ship first and validate if people in the Philippines are actually willing. But we're also building our own app because in order to capture the whole value proposition and also publish for cheap, we have to have our own app as well. And there's going to be content also that you just cannot release in Spotify. This is phase 1. We wanted to see if people are willing. And man, we've released 5 series so far, 5 series so far. 2 out of the 5 are now top 30 podcasts in the Philippines. The only shows there that are actually paywalled. One of them actually just through, what was this, yesterday? Spotify Wrapped was released, right? One of them made to one of the best shows in the Philippines. So now it's like, all right, I see there's a straight line to this. I'm just going to do exactly what we did in 2019. Flood the market with paywalled series, which is available on Spotify, but also going to be available in our own app.
And when you go from this to this, what do you think is the future for Siri?
I think, again, let's just call it what it is. Pocket FM makes what? $136 million annualized. I want that piece of, it's not a zero-sum market. So the future is obviously protect home court first. Win the Philippines. Several milestones we want to do. We want to be cash flow positive again because of building Serie. We went in the red. It's not a big hole. I'm confident that we can definitely bridge that. So when we're in control of our own destiny, What we want to be able to do is win the Philippines very quickly and then also replicate this whole thing in the US. Same thing with Pocket FM. That's their biggest thing. You edit in peso, you earn in USD. So what we're going to be releasing is English content, but instead of also creating our own app where the CAC is going to be massive because I'm going to have to acquire users before we can deliver the value of actually giving the story, do exactly what we did in the Philippines first. Create paywall podcasts. Make it hella cheap for an average American to be able to buy it, get hooked, and make money that way.
On that note, could you share about a personal story about time that you've been brave?
So again, the bravest part is when Joseph passed away, and it was man, if it's 1A, 1B when Partyphile died, but this is not just the bravest because I was hella scared, Jeremy. I was there when he passed away. It was a blur. It was so sudden. The bravest thing is that I continued. I didn't know. Our goal this year when we started this year is, okay, let's just make it through the year. We didn't know what was on the horizon. We knew that we had a way out, which was Serie. We didn't know if somebody's going to give us an opportunity to get that done. So I'm forever grateful for Iterative for giving us that chance. And through that, we were able to prove that, see, it works. So I'm very grateful for Suken and Brian and Kathy and the rest of the Iterative team for allowing us to get that done. But it's that. But yeah. Jeremy, being brave was not about me. But that courage that I was able to muster was because of the people around me. It was not about me. It's about the brave people that I chose to surround myself with. Because if I was the same guy in Partyphile and I was doing this alone, I would have easily quit a long time ago.
For the final dimension here is that you think about all of this, what is maybe a few words or phrase that's kept you going?
Wow. Okay. I always look back into what the definition of Winston Churchill for success. And on dark days, I always remind myself that success is going from failure to failure without the loss of enthusiasm. Right. So I always go back to that. Okay, it might be a dark day, might be a good day, whatever. Try to be even keeled, but when you go to work, have the same mentalities, have the same energy towards this, because eventually the tide would turn. And I've seen so many iterations. I've been in the game for 12 years now, right? There are days that you're lucky. There's days that it's a quadruple whammy. But what you can't control is how you can put in the work and what the type of people you can surround yourself with. Second thing is that it takes a village, right? You need to be able to give yourself the ability to attract the right talent to give yourself the best chance for success. One thing I forgot to tell you is on Serie FM, we have a new co-founder. His name is Rexy Dorado, the former president of Kumu. And if there's one guy who knows how to monetize B2C in the whole Filipino and the Filipino diaspora who's raised up to Series C, that's Rexy. So I wouldn't have done it alone. I'm literally standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'm very grateful that that's it. I remember even one VC even calling me, Ron, you know what? You're like Sisyphus. I'm like, who the hell is Sisyphus? So I Googled, who is Sisyphus? So apparently there's this Greek mythological creature who's damned to eternity to push a boulder up the hill all the time, all the way to the right very top, and then the boulder goes all the way back down again. And that's what he keeps doing over and over again. But I feel like in another world, if I'm Sisyphus, there's going to be one day I'm not going to be able to do it alone. I have a lot of help. And that fucking boulder will eventually go over the hill and goes all the way down because I can't do it alone. So that's a story. Hopefully Sisyphus wins, but I need more help to get that boulder up top.
On that note, thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'd love to quickly summarize the 3 big takeaways. First of all, thanks so much for sharing about you growing up as a basketball jock, but growing up from tough conditions to basically saying you want to be your own founder and business owner to eventually buy your own first home, which you eventually did. Secondly, thanks so much for sharing about, I think, your experiences at Partyphile as well as at Chatbot.ph, which is compare and contrast in what you did well versus what you had to learn along the way and how you also got to contrast that with being an employee. Lastly, thanks so much for sharing about your experience in the podcast world, both from building Hustle Share as well as Podcast Asia Network, as well as now Siri FM, in terms of the experiences and learnings. On that note, thank you so much, Ron, for sharing your experience.
Thank you so much, and appreciate you, Season.